Unusual rituals of the Russian Mafia Brotherhood. Initiation, also known as the initiation ritual. This ritual has existed since time immemorial. After all, gaining entry into a criminal community was not as easy as it may seem. First, a new member of the gang had to earn the privilege of being part of it. To prove their loyalty, the newcomer was assigned as an apprentice to an experienced criminal. If they demonstrated themselves favorably over a certain period of time, earning trust, showing useful skills, their probationary period would move to a new level. The next main test assigned to the newcomer was their first independent task. The mentor would give them a knife and order them to kill and rob the first person they encountered. In addition to bringing back the spoils, they had to present the victim's head as proof. Placing importance on the first encounter is an ancient and ingrained belief in Russian tradition. For example, it was believed that depending on who enters a home first on New Year's Eve, that would determine the course of the entire year. Similarly, the first encounter played a role in determining one's criminal talent. It didn't matter to the gang members whether the novice attacked a defenseless woman or a huge man. The besom at 95 degrees. The favorite ritual of the boss of the Russian Mafia in the United States in the 70s. But let's start from the beginning. The history of the Russian Mafia in the United States began in 1974. At that time, Soviet immigrants settled in the southern part of Brooklyn on the shores of the Atlantic Ocean. By the early 80s, there were already about 50,000 people in the Brighton Beach area, and this neighborhood came to be known as Little Odessa. The place was very peculiar and closed off. English was hardly spoken there, and African Americans were not welcome because they were not considered real Americans. The US authorities knew nothing about people who had fled from the USSR. At best, they received information about immigrants from intelligence services, and at worst from meager police dossier. Only later did Americans realize that the KGB was unofficially exporting criminals to America. It was from these people that a gang was formed, instilling terror in Little Odessa. The organization was headed by a thief-in-law named Yevsei Agran. He hesitated at nothing. Extortion, document forgery, prostitution, contract killings, he did it all. The boss of the Russian Mafia in the United States was a restless man, with a volatile and unpredictable character. However, if there was one thing that remained constant in his life, it was the bath. Yevsei would steam himself every week. It was a whole ritual in which details played an important role. On the day of the bath, early in the morning, a huge Lincoln would wait for the mafiosi at the entrance. It would cross the East River, turn south, and stop in front of the building of the famous Russo-Turkish baths, built in the 19th century. During the years of Prohibition, the fathers of Cosa Nostra such as Meyer Lansky, Bugsy Siegel, and Lucky Luciano liked to relax here. This flattered the Russian godfather. With a businesslike demeanor, Yevsei would step out of the car and enter the premises where his close associates were already waiting for him. At the boss's order, the entire gang would settle comfortably in the steam room with a temperature of 95 degrees, after which a designated person would lash the mafia boss and his protégés with an oak besom. It should be noted that a similar bath ritual was popular among many Russian mafiosi not only in the United States but also in their homeland. By the way, speaking of baths, there was another custom in Russia in the past, paying tribute to local gangsters so they wouldn't rob visitors. The thing is, for many bathhouse owners, the reputation of their establishment was important, so they paid monthly protection money to local bathhouse thieves. At the same time, the protecting thieves, who were on a regular salary, made sure that competitors did not steal the belongings of visitors. The wedding. For a certain period of time in Russia, there was a category of prisoners who, like lightning rods, took responsibility for crimes committed by other gang members. Upon entering prisons, criminals who assumed collective guilt would gamble with other inmates for money, tobacco, and food. However, unlike solitary bandits, gang members were more calculated. During the game, they often resorted to fraudulent tricks, and when the losing convict couldn't settle the debt with the swindler, the latter would propose alternative payment options. One of them was exchanging sentences, which took place when a mafioso was a long-term prisoner and the debtor had a short term. In the prison environment, this ritual was called the wedding. Considering that most prisoners didn't have documents, it was enough to simply exchange names. Thus, the long-awaited freedom became much closer for the swindler. If the debtor, known as Sukharnik, attempted to report the wedding to the authorities, inevitable death awaited them. Coronation. The modern ritual of coronation dates back to the time of the new economic policy. Becoming a thief-in-law is not allowed for just anyone. The candidate must be a seasoned and skilled specialist in their field, such as a house thief or a safecracker. In any case, the bandit must have unquestionable authority among the criminal fraternity. The coronation ceremony takes place either at gatherings held under the pretext of a celebration or in the zone, prison. The event must be attended by at least 2 law-keepers, sponsors of the candidate, and a respected thief who will conduct the coronation procedure. The aspiring candidate is asked to bare their feet and torso, after which the authority examines their tattoos, which can reveal a lot about their past life. If the candidate has not violated the laws of the criminal world and has not been dropped, they are asked to pronounce an oath. After that, new tattoos representing their elevated status as a thief-in-law are applied to their body. Typically, these include stars on the knees and on both sides of the chest, as well as a flying eagle with a crown. After the coronation, the new holder of the highest criminal title must live in accordance with the Thieves' Code. Punishments for violations often involve serious injuries or death. Pranks or playful tests. Pranks are a relatively harmless way by criminal standards to test a newcomer. The process is similar to a game. The pranks themselves are a kind of puzzles, aimed at exposing the future member of the criminal community's lack of knowledge of the laws, norms, and rules of the criminal world. The newcomer's admission to the organization and their position in the criminal hierarchy depended on the speed and accuracy of their answers. It went like this. An authoritative criminal would sit opposite the newcomer in a specially designated place and ask them questions. The number of such tasks was usually not regulated. Riddles were posed at a rapid pace, with no more than 45 seconds given for consideration. For every hesitation or incorrect answer, the examinee would receive a heavy blow to the forehead with a metal spoon. The one conducting the test, typically without hesitation, delivered the blows with force. After each strike, it became increasingly difficult for the candidate to concentrate, often resulting in large bumps growing in the areas of impact. Rituals of punishment for a thief-in-law. Criminal communities have always had a separate list of special punishments for violators of the thief's law. Minor offenses could result in a public slap, while more serious transgressions were met with ear blows, effectively demoting the offender to a lower category. Moderate guilt was usually punished by breaking hands or legs, a measure often applied to those who failed to repay their gambling debts or committed unacceptable acts of violence. These were all ordinary traditions of the criminal society. Death sentences were usually reserved for exceptional cases. For example, severe punishment awaited traitors who defected to law enforcement and spied on their own. Those who stole from the common fund were not spared either. In both cases, the sentence was often carried out by someone closest to the guilty party. If the procedure took place in the zone, prison, the blame was usually shifted to a muzhik, someone with a longer sentence. However, the defendant responsible for the murder had to have a lengthy term and only serve a small part of it, so as not to significantly increase the overall punishment. Sometimes specially hired killers were invited to act as executioners. Different groups had different methods of taking lives, depending on their imagination. Some adhered to classics, knives or guns, while others practiced hanging. More brutal criminals employed sophisticated methods. For example, the accused could be injected with a lethal poison taken from a dead cat. After that, the victim would die within a few days without any visible signs of violence. This absolved the guilty party. When an authoritative figure was sentenced to death, their fate was decided by an all-Russian gathering. If the leader did not attend the meeting, it was considered proof of guilt. Retribution usually found the victim wherever they were, even if they were in places of confinement or on distant islands. Farewell prayer. In the criminal world, there are not only established traditions, but also unique rituals that are conducted in specific locations. One such unusual ritual was described by a former employee of the Ministry of Internal Affairs named Larissa, who found herself in one of the Central Asian prisons with Russian inmates. She quickly gained a reputation, and soon, without her consent, the convicts couldn't take any action. However, what surprised Larissa was the unchanging tradition in the isolation ward. According to this tradition, every inmate receiving a package was obligated to share its contents with those sentenced to death. Neither the escort nor the guard, nor even the head of the detention center, had the right to interfere. Those condemned to death were always taken far away after midnight, but every time the other inmates found out, they would rise and perform a farewell song resembling a prayer as the doomed individual departed. The farewell melody was composed specifically for such occasions. The ritual of knife kissing. After the end of World War II, many commanders with criminal pasts couldn't break free from their old habits. When many thieves who had fought on the front returned to the camps, the zone did not accept them, and the traditional thieves' law adherents also rejected them, considering anyone who collaborated with the state as traitors or suck-ups. However, the thieves-in-law who returned from the front were prepared for the rejection. Understanding that playing politics was far more dangerous than thievery, they preferred to stick to their old interests and eventually declared a new law. A real war began, bloody and prolonged. The theatricality was not overlooked either. A special ritual, the ritual of kissing the knife, was invented for the transition into the new thieves' law. The one who kissed the knife lost all rights in the criminal world and became a bitch forever. Those who refused were mercilessly killed, but before their death, they were beaten and pressed against metal doors. Luxurious coffins and embalming. Perhaps the most vivid ritual in the criminal environment is the funeral of a thief-in-law. With its grandeur, it can rival a theatrical performance. It always includes a cavalcade of luxurious foreign cars, lavish wreaths, a sea of flowers, fiery speeches, and a brass band. However, in the past, there was also the ritual of embalming, which can be traced back to Stalin's regime and the attempt to immortalize the leader's body. Embalming, however, was not cheap. The services of specialists could cost up to $1,500 per day, which meant that only influential and wealthy individuals could afford them. That's why, shortly after Lenin's body was embalmed, the gangsters decided to adopt the funeral ritual and started to perform the procedure with the bodies of slain gang members to demonstrate the economic power of their criminal organization. Before the funeral, the reconstructed body was displayed in an expensive coffin, sometimes costing up to $20,000. The deceased would lie in it as if on their deathbed, and thanks to such noble arrangements, many attendees would forget the violent nature of their death. In the coffin, authorities usually placed a knife, a deck of cards, money, vodka, and a cross. On the other side, in the afterlife, the deceased would use the knife to deal with their enemies, the money to ransom themselves from the devil by playing cards, the vodka to treat a respectable thief, and the cross to justify themselves before God. After the funeral and burial, the gangster was usually immortalized in a large portrait. A life-sized image was placed on the gravestone. In the past, bandits in Moscow were buried in the Vagankovo cemetery, which was traditionally considered a place for the unaffiliated. But today, the burial plots with gangsters are shared by respected individuals and celebrities. For example, near the grave of Vladimir Vysotsky, criminal authorities, the Kvantrishvili brothers, are buried, and near Sergei Yesenin rests a thief-in-law known as Viktor Kogan, nicknamed Monya. Rituals and ceremonies are an integral part of life, not only for criminals but also for ordinary people. They provide a sense of security in an uncertain world, contribute to a positive perception of change, and serve as solace in stressful situations. The key is to choose them wisely. Well, that's all for now. Thank you all for watching, have a great mood, and see you in the next interesting episode.